Others, he's and she's, welcome to My Anime Podcast. Episode 5, I'm ready to end it all. I'm ready to get my arteries sliced off by a scythe-wielding maniac. But you're kind of like, no, it's okay. Episode 5 wasn't too bad. Then by episode 7, you're ready to get electrocuted by a psychotic nurse or whoever was the villain that week.
Burned at the stake, whatever they were doing.
Pip the Hunger, the pumpkin boy. You know, I ultimately have fond memories of it, which will be reflected in my score a little bit. Welcome all to this latest edition of My Anime Podcast. This 113th edition of My Anime Podcast. How are you today, dear listeners? How are you today, dear co-host? On this finest of mornings, afternoons / evenings in Mananamaland.
Oh, I'm a little tired, a little overworked, undercooked, just the usual. How about yourself?
Overworked and underpaid, right?
Right, exactly. That's what I was going for.
It's hump day. Wednesday is behind us. This is the last act of a mediocre Wednesday, we'll say. So I'm feeling pretty good. I've conquered another hump day and looking forward to the impending weekend and the joys that will bring. I'd say overall, positive spirits, if a tired body.
Yes, a juvenated mind is what we need. The body can stay behind on this one. We are going for a little trip down memory lane.
As we go back to retrograding part 2. Last week, the highlights were plentiful. It was essentially an endless summit that we never really climbed down for, except for a quick descent for Tokyo Ghoul Rudave.
Yeah.
Once Tetsu jumped ship, the quality of some of the anime that we were watching maybe took a slight dip.
Well, I think maybe what could be behind that was that original premise we were going through. We were trying to show our friend who wasn't into anime how great it could be. And once that stopped being the impetus for the show, well, the gloves were off. It was time for us to dig into the dirt.
I think we are approaching the time now where listeners suggested shows will start to announce themselves to the retrograde. So we're going to see the first appearances of listener suggested shows. And obviously that comes with upsides and downsides. You can never really choose your favorite anime and be absolutely certain that it's like the best thing in the world that everyone's going to love, right? With that, it's always been a little bit up and down in regards to some of our takes and our tastes towards the listener suggested shows. Like, for every Shogun Roka season 2, there's been a Nemo's Adventures in Slumberland where it was a little bit more of an acquired taste, shall we say. So this is going to be a little bit more of a rocky road, a little bit more peaky, a little bit more valley-y, and I'm looking forward to getting back into it, honestly, because I'm actually kind of looking forward to getting this retrograde behind us and moving on to new horizons already.
To the future grade.
Yeah, as fun as it is fun always looking backwards, but it's also fun creating new history and creating new adventures and new scores. My long-term goal with this retrograde is to export it all onto the website, though. So when it's all done, if you head on over to myanimePodcast.com, I'll probably set up a grading section, a grading tab, or somewhere on the homepage where you can see all of the scores that we've done for the past 113 episodes. It'll be a good little
reference,
yeah, or like an index or historical document.
A record of sorts.
Yes, a record, a magical record of bastards and indexes and scores for the last 113 episodes. While I am mentioning the podcast and the podcast website, you should head on over to the podcast website. Over there are a whole smorgasbord of lovely links that you can click on that will bring you to the various social medias. If you click on those social media links, you will find on the other side our social medias. If you give give us a like, give us a follow, get in touch with us. That's always appreciated. Let us know what you think of our scores. Maybe throw some suggestions for some topics or some questions or just some feedback on the podcast towards us. That would be greatly appreciated. We can get a little dialogue going. If you want to get a little bit more casual in our repartee, you can head on over to the Discord. You can find the invite link on our link tree, or you can find a Discord link anywhere you find our social media or anywhere you find us. You'll find that link tree link and you will find that Discord invite. So go head on over to Discord and help us nurture a little community. Otherwise, there's not really much more business to do except for begging, pleading, groveling before you with our heads to the floor, really desperately wishing to have a 5-star review from your podcast catcher. If you do, that would be greatly appreciated. And I'm going to give you a specific destination this time around. We usually ask for apples, right? We love apples. 5 apples from 5 stars. They're delicious. But today I'm going to ask for ones from Audible. If anyone out there is an Audible user, My Anime Podcast has recently been added to the Audible catalog. I was going to say the My Audible catalog. That's not what it's called. The Audible catalog and Amazon Music, and you can go leave us a review there. It would be greatly appreciated, and it would be a way to curry some favor with us here at My Anime Podcast. That's all the business and the groveling and the stuff that we need to take care of before we get into the meat of the subject today. So I will say we have a little musical interlude, and we'll hop back in on the other side of this and talk about some anime. And we are back. And at the beginning of this episode, we threatened to grade some anime. Well, here we are, following through on a rare promise. It doesn't always happen, but when it does, it happens within the same episode. Before we get to the first anime on the docket, we should explain what we are doing for anyone who wandered in the middle of a retrograde. This is part 2 of the retrograde. So if you are not familiar with part 1 and its mechanics, what we're doing here is we're going back in time and we are grading every anime that we covered on the show as a collective, as a unit. There's a lot of anime to get through. We did 10 anime last week and there's plenty more to go. So there's going to be several parts to this little series. So I hope you're enjoying it. And essentially what we do is we grade each show on 5 categories. Taka, could you talk us through those 5 categories, please?
Yes, I will give the TLDR. If you want the full explanation, you can go back to last week's episode. The 5 categories are characters, plot, visual art, sound, and enjoyment. And a reminder that these are all subjective. These are our opinions. And the score that we'll be giving at the end is an aggregate of both Yata and I's opinions and our individual scores. So kind of a cool little system we have there. Each one we give a score out of 5. And then at the end, it gets all rounded and averaged and we get another score out of 5. Beautiful.
It sounds more complicated than it is. And we make it more complicated than it needs to be. But it works for us. And that's all that matters. Hope you can follow along at home. We are starting off on episode 40 today. We ended on 38. I guess 39 was a bit of a sleepy time episode, so we didn't cover any anime that week, but we're on to 40 now. So we're about a third of the way through My Anime Podcast history. As we enter our second chapter, the Tetsu years are behind us, as we say hello to the dynamic duo, ... years.
I like it. It's a working title, but yeah.
It's a working title. It's a working title, goddammit. My publishers will be happy. They'll throw some suggestions at us, I'm sure.
The terrible twosome.
Terrible twosome. The fearsome foursome -2. Actually, speaking of superhero teams, that kind of fits in nicely to the first
It does.
show on the docket for today, and that is
My Hero Academia Season 2. So, for the characters, Yata gave this one a 4.5, and I gave it a 4.5 as well. We were also equal in our plot scores at 4 and 4 apiece. Visual art, you gave it a 5.0, and I said 4.5. For sound, Yata has it at a 4, and I have it as a 3.5. And enjoyment, you have it as a 4, and I have it as a 4.5. All said and done, it all rounds out to a total score of 4.25, one of the higher scores we've had.
This is a good start to proceedings. A nice, healthy score up in the 4s where we seem to be eternally. We're definitely going to dip below that today.
Oh, we're dipping.
On several occasions. But it's good to have this start. Personal highlights from season 2 obviously will be the Stain arc.
Stain. Yes.
Just awesomeness. But is it better than the tournament arc?
It's hard to tell.
We really do enjoy a good tournament arc. And having both of these little festive nuggets together in a single season, well, weren't we just spoiled?
We were. Coming right off of season 1, I mean, this was everything I wanted out of My Hero. It developed the characters, it went wide, you got a brand new villain. I mean, we kind of got hinted at some villainy in season 1, but this was the first time where I actually felt like the characters were threatened and there was a clash of ideologies. I still have season 2. I mean, spoilers for future episodes, but I still have season 2 as my favorite season and probably the highlight of My Hero Academia, at least from a plot perspective.
Yeah, I agree. Season 2 is my favorite. Just a quick TLDR for anyone who's not familiar with every single episode of the podcast. We actually haven't officially done season 3 of My Hero Academia yet, but it's going to happen eventually. Yeah, it's my favorite one. And we touched on the last episode on some of the things that we felt could have made season 1 a little bit stronger. And a lot of that was just characters and just developing more of what was promised or what it was potentially promising at going forward. And season 2 delivered all that. Not only did we get like an amazing expansion upon Deku and Bakugo, but we also got introduced much more deeply and profoundly to both Tenya and Uraraka, the other of the main cast, I guess. And then on top of that, we also had the real coming to the center of Todoroki and his relationship with Endeavor, which would go on to shape so much of the future seasons. And that was all wrapped into this like tournament arc. And the Stain stuff was just, it was really, really fascinating. If I had to pick a weakness of the season, I can't say I was gripped by the Gran Torino stuff, but it was mercifully brief. It's hard to complain about a couple of episodes which work a cool down period in between these high octane moments, because you need the cool down sometimes.
You do. Yeah, and you need the Rocky montage where the characters training. And that was basically what Gran Torino fulfilled. If you think about this season, there are some huge standout characters that go on to be some of the most memorable characters from the show that really made their splash. I mean, you said it already. Tenya, Todoroki, Stain. These are like probably in my top 5 characters of the whole show. And this was like the moment that they came and shined as bright as they could. I mean, this was the very brief but bright burning of Stain. And man, what a scene that was when everything just came to a head at the end of the season and we got that standoff between the heroes and Stain. And if you haven't seen season 2, I mean, what are you doing?
What are you doing? Come on.
There's an argument to be made that you could stop after season 2. And I think some people have.
I feel like if you're hopping out before All Might fights, all for one, you're doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah.
Because even though my favorite season is this season, that battle was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
But that's for another day. Speaking of battles, highlight of the season for me this time around would have been the Uraraka Bakugo fight. They did a great job of selling me the fact that Uraraka might actually have the W in the bag there, because it was looking like all was lost, and then you had that pan up to the debris hanging above the stadium and the whole crowd lost their mind, and I was losing my mind with them. Unfortunately, that was not to be the case, but for a brief, sweetest of moment, we were allowed to dream, and that was just awesome. I love that battle. Oh, I also really like the second class, 1B. There's a lot of cool characters in that class, like Shinso, and the guy who kind of like borrows powers, the blonde dude, who's a smack talker Skywalker. That guy is just hilarious. Again, like other characters, they would go on later on to have much more of a profound impact on the show itself, but this was the introduction to them. They feel like a real construct of season 2 and a product of season 2, so that was a big plus for them as well.
Yes, a lot of pluses, a lot of payoff. That's season 2. Shall we?
TLDR is we like My Hero Academia, and we like season 2 more than season 1.
Yeah.
But speaking of stuff that we really like, let me tell you about number 2. Second on the list, we have Hoseki no Kuni, Land of the Lustrous, from episode 47 to episode 50. I gave it a 5.0 for characters. Taka gave it a 4.5 for characters. Plot was a 4.0 for myself. It was also a 4.0 for Taka. Visual arts, we both agreed a 4.0. The sound was a 5.0 on both cases, and enjoyment was a 5.0 on both cases, giving me a total of 23.0 and Taka a 22.5, which rounds it out at a 4.55. So one of the higher rated shows we will ever review on the podcast, and the highest rated show for this week.
High praise for Land of the Lustrous.
We think highly of our little gems, our cluster of inclusions. On a personal note, I really enjoyed these episodes. They were some of the most fun. This was, I felt like, us getting firmly used to the duo. We tried out some things here. There's a lot of episode recaps in these episodes.
Yeah.
That didn't last too much longer beyond this point, but that was the big thing, scrambling together episode recaps. And, they were fun, but I'm also not very sad to see them go.
Yeah, they were a lot of work and maybe not the greatest of content anyway. anyways. They were definitely a lot of fun, though, especially my mind calls back to season 1 of My Hero Academia, when basically the golden years of Tetsu, right before he left. We had some good cracks in that one. With just the two of us, they became a little bit more serious, and they just ate up a lot of time. And there was a lot of meat on this show's bones for us to really talk about. And it seemed like maybe our time would have been better spent really digging into some of those tropes and teams. As opposed to just recapping all the episodes, because there were a lot of those. I mean, if you look at the show, this was one of the deepest dives we had done so far. But this one was basically the cookie, right? And it was crumbling, and we devoured that cookie up because this show was amazing. It had the characters, it had the plot, it had the theme, it had just all kinds of philosophy going on and metaphors, visuals. It was stunning to see a fully 3D show, or a fully CG show that I didn't hate and I actually thought looked really good. And the soundtrack was amazing on this. This is one of the few soundtracks to an anime that I actually still go back and put on just because it's that good. What do you have to say? I'm sure you've said a lot. You've made videos about this show.
Yeah, plural. 2. I made 2. It is plural, though. That does count.
Is more than one.
That is a correct statement, what I just made there. Land of the Luster is one of my top 5 favorite anime. Fos is probably in the discussion for my favorite protagonist. Cinnabar is one of my all-time favorite anime characters. I just love her. My favorite cluster of inclusions. Just everything about the series I really, really love. And it's one of those shows that I've never had an issue going back to. You know, I've never like restarted it and then just lost interest in watching it after like 4 or 5 episodes. I always find that when I dip my toe in, I'm in there for all 12 episodes. It's probably my biggest anime tragedy that it's never going to get a season 2. I feel confident saying that at this point, considering Beastars has been out and had a season 2 in the time that we've had this show. And obviously they're both from Studio Orange. This was definitely my coming home to roost moment in terms of like my relationship with 3D CG. Yeah. You know, before this, I think it was very easy just to go, nah, it's not for me. I prefer like hand-drawn animation. And I think I do still, but I'm not turned off by the 3D CG anymore. I feel like with this and with Beastars, and to a lesser extent, I guess, shows like Ajin, it just shows you that the future is not all doom and gloom if we're getting more and more CG integrated products. This was such a beautiful show. Like, there were so many high points. There's something very, very unique about it.
Yeah, I think Studio Orange was kind of their proof of concept. Like, hey, we've got this method and we believe in it. And here, look at this. This shows that this is a viable way to make an anime and make a good looking anime. And I still think it's a very unique show. Even if you strip away all of the sound and music and visuals and all of the pizzazz that it has, it's based on such a unique concept. It was just so out there. And for them to say, hey, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And that's what we're going to do and make it look better than almost everything else. Blew me away.
I think the cool thing about Land of the Lustrous is the fact that you can go so deep on it. It almost feels like the well is sort of bottomless, if that makes sense. Yeah, and you can attack it from so many different angles. We had some pretty abstract discussions when we were talking about it the first time around. It went places. And in that time, I discovered its parallels to Kintsugi, and it kind of like gave me a new perspective on the show. I find that you can constantly sort of go back and just parse through the show and the material itself and come up with several really, really fascinating philosophies and theories behind it. I remember coining a sort of phrase, I guess, for the show that I was kind of proud of: complex minimalism. It's an oxymoron, right? But the show is very, very uniquely minimalist in everything. Like, the world is so sparse, it's so barren. The gems themselves are very minimalist as well. They all wear black. Everything is sparse, but there's layers and oceans of complexity underneath this minimalist wabi-sabi style show. And it's so unique in that respect. The only other show I could think of that aesthetically in that ballpark is Mushishi, but even then it's a poor comparison. Yeah, Land of the Lustrous definitely deserving a 4.55. One of the best shows we've ever done. And if we spend a lot of time talking about it, it's because it is the best show that we're covering today. Unfortunately, it's all downhill from here as we get to show number 3, and a show that is very near and dear to our hearts. We had a lot of fun with, if it was questionable quality-wise.
Yes, and that show is Satsuriku no Tenshi, also called Angels of Death. And for the scores on this one, they're quite a bit lower. For characters, Yata gave it a 3.5, and I'm sitting at a 3.0. For plot, you're at 2.0, and I am as well. For visual art, 3.5 from Yata and 3.0 from myself. For sound, you're at a 4.0, and I went 3.5. Enjoyment, you did 3.0, and I did 2.5. For a final grand total of 3.0 out of 5.
I was a little bit warmer on this one than you were, but we were both kind of middling. But I think the key distinction this time around is that we were both in the mediocre zone, but on the higher end of mediocre. It's above like a 2.5, right? It's a 3, which means it's above average. I think that's reflective of our experience with the show. Ultimately, we came out of this thing saying, yeah, that was actually not as bad as we thought it was going to be. Like, there were moments. Episode 1 was a particular low point.
Yeah.
But we made it through 16 episodes, and it was not that much of a challenge.
It helped a lot that we were talking about it. I don't think this is a show that I actually would have finished if I was watching it on my own. You know, it was one of those like water cooler shows where it's more fun to talk about it than it is to actually watch it.
Absolutely. I think it's also one of those things where we would always have moments of weakness, but it would never be at the same time, right?
Yeah.
I'm at episode 5. I'm ready to end it all. I'm ready to get my arteries sliced off by a scythe-wielding maniac. But you're kind of like, no, it's okay. Episode 5 wasn't too bad. Then by episode 7, you're ready to get electrocuted by a psychotic nurse or whoever was the villain that week.
Burned at the stake. Yeah, whatever they were doing.
Pip the Hunger, the pumpkin boy. You know, I ultimately have fond memories of it, which will be reflected in my score a little bit. I think I gave the enjoyment a 3.0, which is not staggeringly high, but it's a bit more realistic and it's a bit more reflective of a lot of the shows that we're going to see going forward from this point. This show is a little bit different from the other shows in the respect that all the other shows that we would have covered or graded at this point would have had a maximum of about 4 episodes worth of discussion about them. You know, they were discussed and graded in this more concentrated period of time. Where Sasori no Tenchi, we watched as it was airing. And this was the first ever show that we watched as it was airing. We had a lot of fun with it. Characters were fun. It was wild. Like, I was thinking about the OVA ending recently and how off the wall it went with everything. And on a highlight perspective, other than the animation and the ED, which I thought was really, really good, I just loved how we would endlessly predict what was going to happen next and always just get it wrong.
Yeah.
This show is many things. It's not predictable.
It was like they were really trying to make a point of not being predictable. It's like, oh, yeah, you know that thing that we've been hinting at for like 3 episodes? We're not doing that. We're going to go find some sort of other psychopath. Because there's always something else, right? This show had everything, you know, pumpkin heads and crazy doctors. Priests and like hidden floors. And it was just 150% crazy. It was something else. We definitely learned not to put all of our eggs in one madman's basket going forward, but we weren't punished super hard. We had a lot of fun with this, and that's reflected in its score.
Yeah, fun memories. And it's above an average, so good on you. Next one is Snow White with the Red Hair. This is our first ever listener suggested show. I gave it a 4.0 for characters. Taka was in agreement with me. He gave it a 4.0 as well. Plot, I gave it a 2.5. Taka gave it a 3.0. Visual art, I was in a 3.0 and Taka was in a 3.0 as well. Sound was a 3.0. It was a 3.0 for Taka as well. Enjoyment was a 3.5 for myself and a 3.5 from Taka. So we both come in at a 19.0 and a 19.5, giving Snow White with the Red Hair a 3.85 out of 5. So we're back up towards just shy of Tokyo Ghoul Season 1, My Hero Academia range. And yeah, this was actually a really fun introduction to the world of listener choices.
Yeah.
This one ticks all the boxes in respect that it's something that we never would have picked for ourselves, right?
Yes.
There was like less than 0% chance that Snow White with the Red Hair was going to be covered in the show. But through covering that, we got a greater understanding of a side of anime that we might necessarily have been versed in before.
Yeah, this showed what the value of those 5-star reviews was right off the bat. Something that wasn't really on our radar, that was kind of a breath of fresh air. And I think we both were pleasantly surprised by this show. We were kind of in agreement all down the scores here. I didn't have as much of a problem with the plot. I thought it was not super engaging, but, you know, maybe not 2.5. It was just a little bit more engaging. And I really liked the characters here. There was a bit of a romance going on. There was some intrigue. There was, you know, even some villainy with that other prince and trying to survive in his court. I really enjoyed this kind of story, and I wouldn't have really known that had it not been for Snow White with the red hair.
Yeah, so the reason I gave the plot a 2.5 is I actually don't really believe plot is too much of an issue in these kind of shows. I think these romance-focused shoujo series tend to be more character-focused than anything else. And if you enjoy the characters, you're happy to go along with sort of a more pedestrian plot. While this plot was good in places, I don't think it was necessarily like what I was there for. I just enjoyed the characters and their relationship and seeing them sort of growing closer. A big part of it was seeing Shiryuki or Snow White interacting and ingratiating herself with Zen's court and the people in his life. And then on top of that, my next favorite thing is all the side characters, Obi, Zana, his brother, all of these other satellite characters, and investing myself into their adventures and their fates was what really kept me fascinated, more so than the plot. And that's going to be an issue with certain shows going forward. I feel like certain shows are going to get graded a certain way because these are the parameters that we set out.
But not every show needs plot.
Exactly,
or not every show needs great characters, right? It's just not about that.
Yeah, so while it's a 3.85, which is like, it's a very good score. Like, let's not kid ourselves. If you're rounding it up, it's a 4 out of 5, right? That's a great score. That's a way above average. But I feel like for what it needs to be, this show is actually very, very strong. This show is more of a character and enjoyment show than a visual art and plot show, if that makes sense. Unfortunately, shoujos just tend not to get the big bucks when it comes to the animation studios, unfortunately. But this one actually looks pretty good, if not outstanding. But what I look for in these shows more so is strong design.
Yeah, and the design was on point.
Loved like the color saturation, the softer edges. They weren't so angular. Around this time was when you were getting a lot of, you know, Amnesia style, pencily, angular characters, which I don't love as much as this character design. And the world design was great. Like the architecture, the cities itself, castles. It was a really, really pretty series. And it was a fun, I don't want to say distraction, but it kind of was a fun distraction from some of the more heavier anime that we were talking about at this time. You know, this was sandwiched in between Land of the Lustrous and Real Life, right? Having this kind of nice distraction was really good. It
was a palate cleanser.
It was a good palate cleanser. Still need to watch season 2, unfortunately. There's just so much on the plan to watch this at this point. So I've always been like very conscious of the fact that I don't want to get it to be ballooning out of control, and it's already over 100 and something titles. For me, who's quite obsessive compulsive about keeping his My Anime list tidy and free of clutter, that really hurts the soul. But it is what it is.
Well, next time you need your palette cleansed, maybe you can sneak it in.
Absolutely, absolutely. Moving on from Snow White with red hair, we go to our 5th title for today, and that is
Real Life. Yes, this was from episode 56. And for the scores, Yata gave the characters a 4.5, as did I. For the plot, we were also tied at 4.0. Visual art, Yata came in at 3.0 and I at a 3.5. Sound was the same, you at a 3.0 and I at a 3.5. And enjoyment was a 5.0 from Yata and a 4.5 from myself, for a final score of 3.95 and just a little bit better than Snow White.
Yeah, see, this is the show that I was alluding to having issues with. In reality, I think Real Life is actually better than a 3.95 out of 5.
Yeah.
But I'm also trying to be meticulous in my adherence to the categories, right? And obviously with any system, there's going to be outliers. Real Life is a bit of an outlier. I think the characters are excellent. I think the plot is excellent too. And I love the soundtrack and how like discordant and different it was.
Yeah.
But it's not top tier soundtrack. It's just very fitting for what the show is. And the acting is good too, but the visual art is not particularly special in any way, shape or form, right? And that's where it's going to fall down. Now, where Snow White with the red hair had this really incredibly strong character design and world design, Real Life, it was more grounded and it was just less fantastical. And the colors were a little bit more muted. And with the animation being very industry standards, it just fell down to a 3 for me. I'd love to give it like a 4.3 or something like that, right? Because my enjoyment for the show is a 5. I absolutely adored the show, but it is what it is. There are shortcomings from a technical perspective. If the emotional and the narrative perspective is really, really good. Like I really, really loved Real Life. And I love the direction that the episodes that we covered on this went. You know, they're very memorable episodes to me, more so than most other ones.
But I mean, I think going back to the scale and the mechanics of the scoring, I think a potential show that existed that was just as good as Real Life, or even just picture Real Life, but given a more thorough visual treatment, more animation, more design, it would be a higher scoring show, right? And there has to be room to account for that in the system. And while this show is definitely propped up by things that were not visual art, I think that you have to acknowledge that that was a weakness of the show. It kind of looked like it could have been anything, right? It was just very industry standard, as you said. It didn't really set itself apart in any way visually, but it had the chops to be worth watching and to be a valuable experience. I think a 3.95 gets close, if not captures that.
Yeah, this was a show that definitely, for me personally, benefited from a second watch. The first time I watched it, I just blew through it. I don't know why. I never really rated it as something that was a must watch. Never appreciated it at all. It's weird about, I guess, any show or any work of art that, you know, if you're standing from a certain angle at a certain time, it can be the most profound and beautiful thing you've ever seen. But from the wrong angle on the wrong day, you fail to appreciate it the right way, you know?
Yeah.
The cool thing about doing this podcast is that there are certain occasions when you have to revisit something you've already seen, and it allows you to have a whole new perspective on things. Kind of we touched on this in a little bit in the last episode where you mentioned that as our engagement with the shows increased, your appreciation for the shows increased to match that, right? This was an upside of doing the podcast, was just learning that actually real life is really awesome. And it wasn't some sort of mid show that I had mistakenly believed it was at the time. Yeah, dude, I love real life. I really did. Definitely a fun September was had doing this one. I remember we had this image of making September our sort of back to school month and doing a school anime. Right. This was like actually in the midst of like a short-lived theme month idea that we had. So we'll see as like the next show is kind of more Halloween-y focused, and later on we're going to go into Isekai November.
Because that makes sense. Yeah. A new world, right?
You had to fill out a docket and November was there, right?
Yeah. No, I thoroughly enjoyed Real Life, and I thought it was a romp. It was fun. Good, clean fun, and I would go back in a heartbeat and watch it again.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely another show that is bolstered by having a fantastic OVA. So
yes,
make sure you get on that if you haven't already. On to the next one. We have Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust. That's Vampire Hunter D 2000 for anyone who's not familiar with Bloodlust. It's from episode 62. It was from our Halloween month. The aforementioned theme month for October was Halloween. We didn't really go too far inside the box of that one. For characters, I gave it a 2.0. Taka gave it a 2.5. For plot, I gave it a 3.5. And Taka gave it a 3.5. Visual arts, I gave it a 5, as did Taka. Sound, I gave it a 4.0, as did Taka. Enjoyment, I gave it a 4.0, and Taka gave it a 4.5. So it comes together to score a whopping 3.8 out of 5, which I think is perfect. This show is almost directly in contrast to real life. Everything that real life might have been like short of, Vampire Hunter D had in spades, and everything that real life sort of excelled at, Vampire Hunter D said, I don't need that.
Yeah.
I don't care about that. Characters and plot.
For me, this is the show that is an outlier due to the rating system. It comes in at nearly the same score as real life, but this is a show that I wish I could give enjoyment, or let's say visual art.
Like a 7 or something like that.
Like a 7, you know? Or I wish there was a category for style, because this show is just dripping with it. You know, my experience with the show, I think, is greater than a 3.8. But this show didn't need character. It didn't really need much plot beyond a very archetypical, predictable one. It was just so enjoyable for me, personally. Actually, looking back at it now, I feel like I should have given enjoyment a 5, because I was just having so much fun.
This is like your old school, well, we've mentioned it before in the podcast when we were covering it, sword and sorcery romp. I always think of those like Red Sonja, Conan the Barbarian, very like linear. Hero goes and does the thing and fights a bunch of colorful characters, and along the way he integrates himself with a bunch of colorful characters. It's sort of like a one-shot D&D campaign.
Yeah.
From what I understand of the Vampire Hunter D mythos, that's very much how it's written. There's like loose threads connecting each of them together, but the world is malleable enough to sort of shape itself around the needs of that particular story each time. This world, though, is just, it's freaking beautiful. Like, obviously, Yoshitaka Amano is the art director behind and the original creator of Vampire Hunter D, so it just looks stunning, right? He's got such a unique style. Now, it's not always brought to anime correctly, as GBT or whatever the hell it was from late last year was proof of. For me, this is the quintessential Yoshitaka Amano anime adaptation. More so even than his work on Angel's Egg, which, while a phenomenal work of art, it felt more Oshi than Amano, where this one really felt Amano. This was like a series of, and this is funny saying this because it's so different visually to Makoto Shinkai, but you know what the joke is? That had like 5 wallpapers per second.
Yeah.
This had that as well.
Yeah.
These incredible like set piece moments where they're just so stylized and just so like epic. It was like one part Western, you know, like those old Westerns, you'd see the sweeping shots of the desert or whatever. Here you'd have giant sandworms coming out in the background of this beautiful desert. It's a movie, so the animation is obviously incredible. Art is just so quintessentially Amano. And the world that we got while simple and not really explored too deeply, I liked the elements of it. For example, the Barbaroi, those ghost assassins. That name has stuck with me all this years. As soon as I heard it for the first time, it's like, that's a word that I'm going to be able to summon at any time on like my PIN number, you know, or a password for random website number X42. Yeah, dude, what a great movie. This was actually a mistake on our part. Believe it or not, this was another listener requested show. This was from Bill from Tuning Japanese. His actual request was the original Vampire Hunter D movie. But I was so convinced that, he obviously meant Bloodlust, because Bloodlust is freaking awesome. Yeah. He didn't.
So we just snuck this one in. Yeah, no big deal.
This is also one of my very first anime. Very, very, very first anime.
Wow.
This was my first ever anime DVD. It was a double feature. It was Blood, the Last Vampire, and it was Blood the Last Vampire and Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust, and it was like a double feature DVD thing that came with a magazine.
That sounds confusing.
It was. Early on, I remember thinking that Blood the Last Vampire might have been more of my speed. It's a bit more horror-y. It has more of like a Resident Evil kind of quality to it, but as I've matured, this is miles ahead of Blood the Last Vampire. And that's no shit on Blood the Last Vampire, but this is just, what a great movie.
I wish this was my first anime, because that would have been great.
I also wish they had more of this anime, because it's just little standalone stories, right? You could have a bunch of these. This could be like a series of 7 to 10 movies. And you could have had a bunch of different directors of different even studios doing their own interpretation of D. And I think that would have been really cool.
Yeah, it's like a canvas, right? You can kind of do with what you want with the world and the character, right? It kind of fits into all of those different hero stories that you could tell with him.
The roaming badass is definitely like a genre that feels more semi-confined to the past, but I think on occasion it's definitely worth dusting out and enjoying. Let's get a couple more in if we can. Zombieland Saga, episode 62.
Zombieland Saga. For characters, Yata gave this one a 4.5, as did I. For plot, Yata came in at a 2.0, and I came in with a 2.5. For visual art, Yata had a 3.0, and I had a 3.5. For sound, we were tied at 4.0, and enjoyment was also a 4.0 from both of us, giving it a 3.6.
Zombieland!
Yeah, this was a fun one.
It was a really, really fun one. This was our second dose of weekly watches, coupled up with Irazuki Sekai, The World in Colors. And those two were such a weird little contrast, where you had one that was really like screaming for as much plot as possible, and one that I was actively saying like, I don't want more plot, please. Just give me like fun set pieces and the comedy, and I'm happy. Like, I actually remember complaining about having too much plot one week. Yeah. Like, what is this? This is not what I'm here for. Very fond of Zombieland Saga. It's definitely aged really nicely for me. Certain shows, as you have a little bit of distance from them, you might have forgot the reasons why you were so enamored with it in the first place. This retains a sort of warm place in my psyche. I'm pretty excited for season 2, which is coming out next season, I believe. Like, it's a matter of weeks away at this point. And I'll be looking forward to seeing the girls again. Hopefully they can expand upon the music a little bit more and tighten up the performances.
Yeah, that was the one thing that was kind of not the best, was that CG for the idol performances. And that's a common thing with a lot of these idol shows. I guess it's easier to animate or whatever, but I was really quite happy with the varied genres that they tackled, and I hope to get more of that from a season 2. Really, the standout was the sound. Those songs were catchy as all heckins, and the voice acting as well was phenomenal. Of course, you get a great in there like Mamoru. He just knocks it out of the water, but I don't think that the other voice actresses, especially the ones that played the main cast of females, I don't think any of them were slacking.
No, not at all.
Except for maybe Tei Yamada, but even then, like, it takes a talent to emote.
The girl who plays Rei Ayanami in Evangelion is also Tei Yamada.
Who does Tei?
Yeah. She's somebody who's extraordinarily overqualified for the role of Tei Yamada. Kontono Mitsushi.
Yeah, and they got her just groaning.
Her catalog is outrageous. Karkata Sakura, she's the mom in Crayon Shin-chan. She's in Decadence, actually. She's a little ball thing that hovers over the villain's shoulder. Oh, she's Katsuragi. She's Misato from Evangelion.
Oh.
Not Rei Ayanami. Even better, she's the actual best girl. That was one of our fun predictions, predicting what was going to happen with Tayamada.
I'm still convinced that she's going to start talking at some point. Otherwise, why did they go to the trouble?
For the joke, right? For the meme. Zombieland Saga, the series of hilarious set pieces, punctuated by a hilarious performance by Mamoru Miyano and a bunch of like good physical comedy. That's why I give the plot like a pretty below average score, because the plot is so not. Like, what was the plot, right? They had to save Sendai?
Yeah, I guess they had.
Who cares?
They were trying to figure out why they were all zombies and how. Because that was the big question, but I don't think they ever found out.
Yeah, I didn't even care. I was just happy to see them do their thing.
Yeah, it didn't matter. It was all just an elaborate scaffolding to let us watch zombie girls singing and doing slapstick comedy, because that was a huge part of it. And it made me laugh on the regular.
So, Zombieland Saga Revenge Season 2 will start airing on April 9th.
Ooh.
Not far away now. Now, as we already mentioned, Zombieland Saga was part of a two-part course, a two-part meal. That was always the palate opener. What's the word for cleanser? The entree?
The palate assault.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, the dessert, or the second, or the main, or whatever you want to call it, in most occasions was Uruzuko Sekai, or The World in Colors, which was from Production IG, and it also aired concurrently with Zombieland Saga. For The World in Colors, I gave it a 3.0 in characters. Taka also gave it a 3.0. For plot, I gave it a 3.5. Taka gave it a 3.0. Visual art, I gave it a 4.5. And Taka gave it a 4.5 also. Sound, we both rendered in at 3.0. Enjoyment was a 3.5 and a 3.5 for a score of 3.45 out of 5. This show's forgotten, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It didn't age that well for me, because it sort of just disappeared after it aired, which is a little bit sad, because I remember like enjoying it quite a lot as we were doing it, and felt the contrast between this and Zombieland Saga was really pleasant.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
But yeah, I don't know. It didn't age as well as Zombieland Saga for whatever reason. And I think I remember, if I'm not mistaken, at the end of it all, when we were discussing like which one we preferred, I think I remember saying that I thought Irazuka Sekai would stick with me more. It didn't.
It didn't really stick with me either. I kind of forgot about a lot of the plot. I do remember some highlights, but I just never got sucked in. And I think that's a large part of why.
You weren't sucked into the paintings like they were in the show.
Yeah, I guess. That was a thing.
I just checked it. It's not Production ID. Just shows you how badly I remember this show. It's PA Works.
Yeah, there was somebody a little bit unexpected. The way the show looked was also unexpected. We saw the promotional material. We thought, man, this looks too good to be true. And it actually kept with that level of production, visually at least. I thought the sound didn't quite live up to it. I was not blown away by the soundtrack or any of the voice actors, really. I mean, you contrast this to Zombieland, and it was like they were kind of filling the holes that the other one left in a similar way that Vampire Hunter D and Real Life were matched, in that this one had all the visuals and a little bit more plot, and the other one had all the sound and a lot more humor and character, for me at least.
The memories of this one are predominantly two things. One is underestimating the quality of the animation and then being really surprised when it would just amp it up every so often. And then two was just a warm, fuzzy sort of feeling of it. It was like low stakes fun until it became high stakes. Like she started disappearing randomly towards the end. Looking back at it now, it was a bit unnecessary. I think it could have just stuck to her regaining her sight, seeing colors again, resolving her estranged relationship with her mom or whatever, and just going back into the future a better person. And then we had this whole disappearing arc and stepping into the photos, and it just felt like it was maybe a little bit too much gravity. I wanted a little bit more of the Snow White with the red hair softness, but overall it was an enjoyable experience. I came out of it feeling positive and happy with what I got. I thought the ending was really nice, and The World in Colors, it was a fun little odyssey, if not a memorable one apparently.
Yeah, it was pleasant. We'll say that.
Very pleasant. So we got to get out of here. We're on a bit of a time crunch this week, but see us next week for the third installment of Retrograde. I feel like we got at least two more on us, so join us then. Bye bye, love you, bye.